Hello, everybody. This is Scott Palmer, Executive Officer of the Builders and Remodelers Association in the Greater Boston. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar. Today, I'd like to introduce Mr. Thomas Dross of EstimateRocket, presenting on the art and science of creating estimates and proposals. We'll be going through the slide deck. As any questions occur to you, feel free to send a chat to my attention, and we'll put that in queue for a little Q&A after the presentation. Also, at that point, we will probably open lines in case anybody wants to make a verbal comment. So appreciate you all having your lines muted as you can. And we will respond to questions as they come in over chat. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Thomas. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here. As Scott mentioned, I'm the president of EstimateRocket, and happy to be presenting today our webinar on the art and science of creating estimates and proposals. As most of you do on a day-to-day basis, creating estimates and our proposals is one of the most important things we do for our businesses. I mean, it really drives all the things that we do as contractors. They can make you or break you. You know, how many have you done? How many did you blow? How many did you high five when they were done? You know, that's how we look back on the history of our estimating and proposal process. Today, we're going to kind of talk about it maybe in a new way or just using some different terms. We're going to talk about the science and the art of estimating and proposals. And why do I break it down into art and science? I think there's a definite distinction between the components or pieces that go into creating your proposals. Certainly, there's a science component, which is, hey, the technical aspects of getting all our labor and our materials and our subs and our profits and all that incorporated into our proposals. And then there's an art, and the art is, what does it look like? Does it include the right things? Is it speaking to the people that we're presenting it to? Obviously, we work with a variety of different types of customers. We have residential customers, commercial customers, industrial customers, all different with all different perspectives and outlooks, and we need to make sure that as we propose to the various customer types that we're speaking to them, that they understand what we're saying and they get it. That's kind of critical. So that's what we're gonna review today. Just a little background on myself. I have been an accountant. I've developed software for many years and implemented it with our customers, with various customers. I've done software support for customers and been involved, heavily in the sales of software. So I kind of, it's not construction, but I've actually worked a lot with construction contractors in terms of the software we've developed and built, and have been pretty involved in the process. So I do have a fair amount of background. I've done everything, literally thousands of proposals for software and services over the years, and I've helped hundreds of contractors streamline their estimating and sales processes through the use of software. So that's sort of my background. I've prepared estimates from anywhere from $1,000 to over $2 million. So got kind of a spectrum of the different types of proposals that get done. I can say that even today, I still learn something every day by listening and looking and exploring and seeing what other people are doing in their proposals. I think it's really important to do that because we don't know it all, and we can always learn not only from our peers but also from our competitors. Sometimes when we lose a bid and we really should have gotten that bid, maybe we didn't look at the competitors in the right way, or maybe we didn't know our customer well enough. Those are really critical things to keep in mind. Bottom line, I wish I had EstimateRocket a long time ago. It would have made my life a whole lot easier. All right. And again, as Scott mentioned, please, if you have questions along the way or ideas or thoughts, just feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll collect those and take them on at the end. So what's an estimate or proposal? So I like to differentiate between the two because there's 100 different names that people apply to them. To me, the estimate is the workup. It's the details that go into the proposal, which is what we're going to actually present to our customer or our prospect. So that's really kind of the distinction. The ultimate goal of doing an estimate is to generate a proposal and get it in the client's hands and close the deal. That's where we're going. We call our things a lot of, depending upon the trade and the industry, it's a presentation, an estimate, an offer, a promise, a quote, a bid, an agreement. I've heard all different names that people use for them, but the bottom line is we create an estimate and generate a proposal to our customer. What goes into the presentation or the proposal? I like to think that the main thing that goes into the proposals is you, your sales team, your crew, your solutions to a problem, your reputation, especially your attitude, your image, and your experience. All those things hopefully can be a part of every proposal you do. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are things that we all know. And in the same way that I'm talking today, I talk to my business coach on a regular basis and ask him questions that I've asked him thousands of times before and should know the answer to. But I keep re-asking those questions just to make sure that I'm not missing something or that I've caught everything for a particular situation. So it's always worthwhile to keep exploring and relearning from as we go through this process. So it does matter what ends up in your proposals. Your company is the sum of all the people that work for you or represent you, and you want the terms that are associated with you to be things like professional, fair, integrity, honesty, and tough. Those are the terms you'd like people to refer to you by. So you're not a pushover. You're fair, and you're going to put together something that they can rely on in turn and know that they're going to get what you've offered them. At the end of the day, people do business with people, not companies. So your reputation and your presentation and your image are all very important as part of your proposal process. We don't want to forget that because sometimes it's really easy to just put numbers down on a piece of paper. And even if for people that you've been doing business with for a long time, consistently, reaffirming your reputation and who you are and how you do things is an important part of it, because if you're not doing that, someone else is doing it, and eventually, you may start getting called into question. So it's really important to keep reaffirming those points and making sure that people know who you are and what you're all about. So with that, I think that before we get to the paperwork part, there's a bunch of things that we need to be doing. And this is every time you meet or speak with people, we want to be building relationships and rapport. Again, people do business with people. Every contact that your company makes with someone or with another company is a sales opportunity. Not necessarily for a product or a service, but to sell your company. So they think of you when it's time to propose the next job. Doesn't have to be a hard sell, but how your customers feel about you greatly influences their desire to do business with you. Before you give someone the proposal, you want them to be thinking, gosh, I hope this proposal comes in the way I'm expecting, because man, I really want to do business with these guys. That's what you really hope for. That gives you a leg up over the competition, even though the competition in some cases may be, have a lower price. We don't want to compete on price if we can help it. It's all part of that process. Again, who would you rather do business with? Late, sloppy, and unprepared, or early, prepared, and on the ball? I think we all know who we'd like to choose. Finally, though, you need to make sure and highlight and inspire these attitudes in your team members, both your in-house reps and anyone who's representing your company outside. Very important that you inspire them to understand that, clients knowing their expectations and having expectations and knowing what differentiates your company from the competition is all critical all the time. Very important to focus in, especially in this day and age where communications are so prevalent and there's so many avenues out there for media, to identify who the competitors are, and for new people to step in and look really good that don't even have a reputation. So that constant communication and building your relationships is really key. So what goes into the estimate? We've set our reputation, hopefully, and they're looking forward to seeing our presentation. What goes into it? So as I mentioned, we're breaking this down today into the art and the science. So the science is, what are we going to do? The scope of work, how, what, inclusions, exclusions, then the pricing. We need to know our costs. We need to know business and conditions and price influencers to set our prices. And then finally, the art. So I've listed out a few things that I consider to be the big parts of the art. How quick you get back to them, what impression you make, how you differentiate yourself, what's your solution, and what's your presentation. They all play a huge part. Got to get back to them on time. Can't overemphasize that. Again, in our current with all the technological advances we have, responding to people on a timely basis is becoming more and more important, and it's going to get worse. Things are going to continue to move faster and faster, and if we're not responding on time, we're going to have difficulty keeping up with our competition. So scope of work, that's a big part of it. I think it gets underemphasized sometimes. And again, this does depend obviously on the types of projects you're doing, but it's always critical. In a residential scenario, in many cases, the scope of work is not only going to tell the client what we're going to do for them specifically, but it's going to tell them about how we do it and why we're better and what our differentiators are. It's going to make them want to do business with them, and it's a great opportunity to explain within the context of a price how we're going to do it. What are the things that we include standard? Hey, we don't hire outside contractors, or we do hire outside contractors. Whatever is your strength, our folks clean up after themselves on the job. All those little things go into explaining a process for a customer that makes them go, yeah, that's definitely what I want. So this is your chance when you're building your scope of work to get the facts down in a way that's going to convince your prospect you're the best choice. It has to accurately describe the work so there's no misunderstanding down the road about what's included. It has to set the expectations for the customer. So one of the things I hear time and time again is that I can't set up a standard scope of work, and it always has to be created for every new job. And to that I reply, bullshit. 90% of what you describe about the services that you're providing are probably going to be the same on every proposal. And there's going to be 10% that uniquely describe what this particular job is. I would challenge anyone to submit me some scopes of work, and I guarantee you I'll find a 90% similarity between the volume of text that's there as we build them up. So with that said, it's really important to develop your standard scope of work text, because those are things that you can easily incorporate into every proposal, and it really speeds up the process. Then what you're left with is simply defining the uniquenesses of this particular project. Much easier to do, takes a lot less time. And ideally, we want to get this proposal and estimating proposal process down to a limited amount of time. Obviously, I wonder how many of us actually sit down and say, hey, how much does it cost me to do an estimate? It's an almost terrifying amount depending upon what your business is and what types of jobs you're proposing. It's a lot. There's a lot of money spent on doing estimates and proposals. So anything we can do to streamline those processes and make them more efficient is going to save us money and get us more jobs. So part of that is pre-building some scope of work type text that you can use over and over again. Number one, it makes sure that you have a consistency in each proposal that you're sending out for the basics that you do and the basics that you don't do in terms of includes and excludes. It really can help you streamline your process and make sure that you're presenting consistently to all the customers in your marketplace. So one other thing that I think is really important to get into the scope of work during the estimating phase is things that you saw on the job, or on the site. So you went out, you did your site survey, or you're bidding it from a set of plans. You need to capture the unique things that you saw in this project at that time. Because what happens is, if we get the job, it may be a month down the road or weeks down the road, and the estimator may not remember exactly what those things are. Well, some of those things, if you're doing your job right, will lend themselves to making sure that you end up with a good proposal and making sure that you end up with a profitable job. Because a lot of the time we see things as we're out doing our estimate that are going to become factors in the production of this work and may or may not make it easier or more difficult. So really important to capture those things and have a tool that allows you to document those kinds of things along the way. So that, I think, gives us a good idea, scope of work. And again, I know I'm not using, saying anything everybody doesn't know. I just hope I'm saying it in with some different emphasis to help you, be more successful and more profitable in your processes. Okay, so next thing, pricing and costs. Costs, we all know that's what it costs us. What's it going to cost us to build, to do this job? And then price is going to be our cost plus whatever overhead we need to add in and whatever profit we need to add in. Obviously we can't sell our work for less than we're paying for it without going out of business. Everybody knows that. We don't always bid every job that way. In terms of estimating costs, I think it's important to take into consideration that there are definitely resources out there that can help you keep up with whatever cost changes are being made and process changes that are being made. Sometimes, especially when we're busy, we focus on exactly what we're doing, and we're not stepping back and looking at what trends are happening or what changes are happening. People participating in sessions like this are at least out there thinking, hey, what's new? What how can I look at things differently? What should I be looking at differently to make sure I keep up? Because your competition is definitely doing it, whether they're new upstarts or whether they're established players. The ones that are going to win are going to keep up with things. So in terms of the costing, we've got various aspects of costs. So the first I'm going to talk about is labor costs. So in a lot of scenarios, depending upon what trade and what services you're offering, you're going to have into your labor costs are going to go your production rates for whatever type of work you're doing, subs versus employees, loaded cost per hour, average loaded rate. I'm going to talk a little bit about labor rates in the next slide in a little more depth, because I think that can be a really important consideration. One of the things that I kind of focus on, if you do have a lot of your own employees and using your own labor, is to make sure you're reviewing your average labor rates on a pretty regular basis to make sure that your labor rates are meaningful. And I tend to suggest that you don't use a base labor rate, but you use a loaded rate. So you take into consideration taxes and insurance when you're doing that. When it comes down to these kinds of calculations, your bookkeeper or your accountant or even a business coach, if you have one, can be a great resource for helping you put this together in a way that makes it meaningful to you, so that when you are quoting your labor, you have a good idea that you're not only covering your costs of your labor, but you're also including covering the overhead and the profit margins that you want to have in there. So I think that's a really, really important thing to consider. So in the next, when it does come down to calculating average hourly labor rates, there's a couple of methodologies you can use for that. Generally speaking, I recommend that you take, in a simple way, you take your entire payroll divided by your hours paid. That's your hourly cost, and that should include any insurance and taxes. Sometimes I see people using varying labor rates. Now, if that's your market and you're actually charging different rates for the different employees, absolutely makes sense. And in that case, to get your average rates, you're going to have to segment your labor by the way you bill it out. So if you've got, craftsmen and helpers, then at different labor rates, then you absolutely have to go through that process of having, multiple average rates calculated for those guys to make sure, again, that you're costing things out properly. I think that's definitely a huge consideration, and something that definitely needs to be done if you're going to come out with consistent, accurate estimates of your costs. The next category we're going to move over to is materials and supplies. So our materials and supply costs are going to break down into a couple things. So I classify subs here under material and supply costs because generally speaking your sub costs are going to be a fixed cost as opposed to a labor cost, which is going to be your own people that you have to factor in variably. So when you're examining that, if your own labor is doing the work, then you absolutely have to get your detail of your material costs and make sure that you're calculating that out appropriately and doing a full takeoff of whatever that project is. There's a couple ways to go about that as well. If you do a detailed takeoff and then send that information to your supplier to get the actual cost on it, that's one methodology. The other methodology is to use some of the costing resources that are out there, things like the Craftsman cost books or the RS Means costing information, in order to at least get a ballpark to use for your bidding process. Depends upon your resources and how your company is set up as to how you go about doing those. Things to watch out for, again, as you're going through this process is where are we in the country? What are your site issues? Is this a project that I've never estimated before? I've never done this. Highly recommend that you reach out to resources in those situations. Call a friend, talk to a fellow Bragby member, but you reach out to resources when you're doing something new that you haven't worked on before. It definitely can't hurt, and in many cases it can save you a lot of money and a lot of time. Definitely worthwhile reaching out to other resources. Can't recommend that enough. We all know that as we're bidding jobs, the smaller jobs, we make a mistake, the impact may not be that large. Big jobs, we make a mistake, we can really, really get our company in trouble. So obviously the size of the job is going to be in some respects a determining factor as to how much effort we're going to put into creating this proposal. And then finally, in order to do this effectively over time, you need a feedback method or a feedback loop that will let you, when the job is done, compare what you estimated the job at and what it actually cost you. That's really the only way that you're going to drill in on this process and figure out where your holes are, where your problems are, and make sure that over the long haul you're making the profit that you want to make to keep your company healthy. And we'll talk a little bit more about pricing in a minute, but if you underestimate your costs or estimate your costs or your subs inappropriately, you lose the opportunity to you lose the opportunity for profit, and so your profit and overhead don't even get in there if you've not estimated your cost properly. The other question that always comes up, and again, depending upon the type of project and how much work you do in-house, is the decision between using subs for work that you don't do or using subs to supplement work that you do. Those are all obviously options. You have to weigh that out during the estimating process. In the same way that you're preparing a proposal for someone else, you have to make sure that your subs that you're contacting are doing appropriate proposals for you. So obviously, over time, being able to learn to trust that person in the same way that your customers trust you is a big factor. So definitely something to keep in consideration. In terms of just other, what are the materials, raw materials, subs, supply and sundry costs, all those little miscellaneous things that add up, small tools, those types of things. Very important to keep track of those costs, either with a project or as overhead. And finally, there's always things like rental equipment. are the things I'm going to need for this particular job that I need to take into consideration because I haven't done this type of job before, or it's got some exceptional, it's got 30-foot ceilings, I'm going to need a scissor lift in order to do the lighting in this room or something along those lines. So always important to try to, cover all those unique things that you're going to need when you're doing your costing. So assuming we've gotten our labor costs together and we've gotten our material and sub costs together, the next thing we need to do is to factor in overhead. So again, overhead is something that's really important to calculate. It's actually pretty straightforward to calculate. You just need to come up with your own methodology that you can update on a periodic basis. Again, this is one of those things that your accountant or your other business resources can help with, business consultants or other friends and family, if you will, in the business that might be able to help you with their methodologies for calculating overhead are very important to use. A simple methodology is you add up all your monthly recurring expenses and costs except for your materials and labor costs and sub costs, and you divide that by your total sales. That's a simple way to figure out what your overhead percentage is. So that way you can apply that percentage to add that percentage to whatever your cost is in order to at least reach overhead. And then in a moment we'll talk about profits, adding profits to the pricing as well. So again, add that percentage to your labor and material costs before you go ahead and calculate your price. I think we could probably do a whole webinar easily on application of overhead and calculation of overhead. That might be a good future topic. It reaches back into my accounting days. Okay, so assuming we've got our costs collected now and we've added in our overhead, the next thing we have to do is figure out what's our profit. And again, here's the list of what goes into profit. Profit's the amount you need to include to stay in business, and it has to include planning for the future. It has to include the reward and for the risk you're taking as an entrepreneur and a business person. Has to be enough to fund the future growth of your company. And this again is one of those things that a business coach, which if you haven't figured out already, I'm a big fan of business coaches. I think everybody needs a business coach, no matter how small or how large you are. And peer groups like Bragby are actually a really good, not a total substitute for a business coach, but at least it's a step in the right direction where you can get together with peers and talk about and discuss what works and what doesn't work and what's working for them and what's worked for you, and be able to share those things in a similar fashion. A business coach can help with that. So ask your friends and your colleagues, or if you're going to a seminar somewhere, sit down and talk with a few people from other competitive areas or non-competitive areas about what do they do for profit? How do they where do they start? What's a reasonable profit? Where do you want to go with it? Everybody's got to figure out that number, and then you got to make sure you're using that number on every project, or almost every project. So then once you figure that out, you've decided what you're going to apply for profit. Now we've got a price to give to the customer. Now in a lot of cases, a lot of these steps that we just talked about can be boiled down into product pricing. So, if you're doing recurring services of any sort, you can come up with a price to do A or do B or do C, and then apply a quantity factor to that price. So if it's things that you can break down from a pricing standpoint into a price per square foot, or price per day, or price per yard, or whatever might be an appropriate metric, for that particular service. If you can get to that point, which is a very positive place to get, even things like cabinetry can be boiled down to a price per square foot. Obviously, there's different prices per square foot for different qualities of product. But again, all of those things over time if you take the time to go back over your past projects, you can come up with numbers that you can make it easy to define how to quickly do an estimate. A cabinet, how much per unit to build it, how much per unit to paint it, how much per unit to install it. You can build those things into standard pricing. Once you get to standard pricing, it makes this whole process a lot simpler, because we can basically skip most of the steps we just went through and go on the site or look at the plans and do a count of what's there and write in a quantity and get a price out of it that already includes your cost and your overhead and your profit amounts. That's the ultimate goal of getting your estimating process down to standards-based pricing or unit-based pricing, where you can go and build your proposal simply by going out to the site and doing counts. And I guarantee that that's achievable. It seems daunting, I think, in many cases when you start looking at that, at how to do that, but I guarantee you it's doable. Companies like Craftsman, Costbook, and RS Means, they've been doing it for years. Now, you may feel like they don't have enough sensitivity to your marketplace. That's possible. But even if you use those as guidelines to weigh against your pricing, it's a good benchmark that you can use or reality check that you can use to know, okay, at least my pricing is plus or minus what this standards-based pricing is. But again, ultimately, if you can get the estimating process down to a count and quantity collecting process, it's going to speed up your process. It's going to make your estimating significantly more consistent, and it's going to remove risk, because you'll be basing things on things you've done in the past. So I highly recommend doing that wherever possible, so that you minimize the number of unique things that you have to deal with on each proposal. And that again is something that your business coach or your accounting professional can definitely help you with, and it's time well spent and well worth it. I guarantee it. Once you've priced and we've sent our proposal out to our customer, is one other thing I want to throw in there is that you make sure, and I talked about this a little earlier, to have a feedback loop. You got to be able to go back at the end of this project, and you got to be able to figure out how you did. Having a good methodology for pricing is really important, but if you can't figure out how the job actually came out at the end, then you really haven't grown at all, because you may need to make adjustments to how you did that particular bid by analyzing what happened on that particular job. So that does take some record keeping, and it takes a little time, but all of these things go into helping you to grow. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. There are some very simple methods of going about that in terms of how to collect the costs for a particular job. And then there's all the way out to some really sophisticated methods. But you need to make sure that you're taking that into consideration, because otherwise it's not a matter of whether you're winning or losing. It's a matter of knowing when you're winning and losing, so that you can make better decisions going forward and into the future. So I definitely, you've got to have that feedback loop in there for sure. Okay, so we've got our price theoretically, or almost have our price. I like to talk about the science of business conditions, and maybe this kind of crosses over a little into the art side of things, but I'm still gonna call it science. So besides all the hundreds of things that go through our minds with each job, there are definitely some specifics that we need to consider for each one. Is this job likely to yield a higher or lower profitability than a normal project for us? Do we like this type of work? Is it too big a project, or is it potentially a distraction from other more profitable jobs, i.e. is it too small? Do we have the manpower without compromising what we're doing at other jobs, without compromising our quality? Is this customer going to be a pain in the ass that will demoralize the team and beat us up over small things? That's a real consideration today, and I think more and more, based on people that are doing a really good job out there, you need to be willing to walk away from some of them when you sense that. There ought to be a really, really huge profit in the job, and not just a lot of dollars, if you're going to put up a lot of crap, to put it lightly. Is this the job? Another consideration: is this the job we've been waiting for? Is this one going to move us into a different circle of influence, or a different circle for referrals for the future jobs to get us more of a type of work that we're trying to move into? All these things are going to weigh into how flexible we are with our pricing on a given job, and they should. I mean, there are times when everybody is willing to make a little bit of a deal now and then, and as long as you've taken into consideration your overhead and your profit in your pricing already, then you do have a little bit of room for negotiation, on a given project. So, I definitely, you should never purposely lose money in a job, or for that matter, gouge a customer, unless they're really jerks. But there's times when we may consider raising or lowering our prices just based on how much or how little we want the job. And that definitely slides over into the art side. So the other side of there's the business influences, and then there's the price influences. So price influences, and this may be more of a factor for certainly for residential than it is for commercial, although there are times when it influences commercial jobs as well. But what type of work is this? Is it a repair work? They got to do it. Is it insurance work? They got to do it, and they're going to get paid for it. Is it an impulse? Is this something they really don't need, but they're wanting to do it? Is it something that the place needs because or wants? Do they need it because it's going to fall down if they don't do this, or do they just want it because it's going to look a little prettier? All those considerations can go into how you price it. And again, depending upon what your objectives are at any given point in time, you can make those decisions effectively. So having this information, considering these different things as you're going through the process, I always find I think is a really critical piece. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting to the art. So the art, so the art, the way I look at some of the art things is it's more the squishy business things and the squishy personal things that you're going to do to make sure you grow your business and to keep people coming back to you. One of the things I always say, so the speed of response is the first topic under the art. You can always push a slow decider out on your schedule, but you can't schedule work you didn't get. So you can always make that decision to say, better to be able to say, hey, I can do it, but I can't start until, than to say, oh, you went with someone else because I didn't get back to you soon enough. Keep the choice in your court. We always want to be the ones to be able to make the decision as to whether we want to move forward or not. We would rather not give the customer the opportunity to do that, especially just because we didn't get back to them. What's that saying about 90% of winning is showing up? Well, it's definitely true. So why do we not respond? We're all guilty. That's probably the number one thing that people complain about in almost any industry is, why won't anybody get back to me? So why do we do that? Well, we do that because we don't know everything we need to know. We do that because, we don't want to do a bad bid. We do that because we don't want to lose the job because we don't know everything. Or we do that because we're not ready for more work. And that's one of the big limiters for companies. Some companies that are growing is they're afraid of more work. But just always keep in mind that if you're doing a great job out there, and it's not necessarily a commercial job where there's 1,000 subs involved and you're just one small piece of the puzzle, and it has to get done in a certain time frame. But if there's not a required time frame on a job, people generally speaking are willing to wait. So don't be afraid of those jobs, especially the ones where you're pretty sure that the job's not going to have a deadline. Bid those immediately because those are winners. You can use those, if nothing else, for fill-in work when you need it. So always weigh out, obviously, the sense of urgency that your customers have in terms of when they want a particular project to be done. Another part of the art of proposals is differentiation. So again, we have to figure out how are we going to, how do we want to differentiate ourselves from the other guys? And this, again, is a critical, a critical piece for growing your business. Your reputation matters and your business ethics matter. And, those things and your work, quality of your work matter. And these things, a lot of them command a higher price. We don't really want, if you can avoid competing on price, then you've already won a big part of the battle. Everybody struggles with that. Everybody wants to be able to, ideally you want to be able to charge a premium, but we end up giving a lot of work away. Well, part of that is just our lack of confidence in who we are and what we're doing. So, you can charge a premium if you're doing what you say you're going to do on a consistent basis, and people love your work and people love working with you. That's a really important piece of the puzzle. So, emphasize your strengths to people. Highlight the things that the other guys leave out. If you're competing, if you're in a competitive situation, highlight the things that the other guys aren't saying, possibly, that are important. And sometimes, not necessarily directly, but sometimes in your proposals, you can highlight something that other guys don't include in their proposals. So be it an inclusion or an exclusion. So you can give comfort to the consumer or the client that you've thought of this thing. And again, that happens on every project of any size. There's things that that you might be able to throw in there that would change the deal around, because the person reading your proposal is going to know, wow, this person really knows what they're talking about. So differentiation, can help us to get to to higher profitability and more work, and that's definitely one of our goals. Okay, presentation. So that's kind of my final slide. And there's a lot of pieces of information that go into the presentation. It should include all of the things that we've been talking about. You want to make it look nice, but this is not a Fortune 500 annual report. I see a lot of time wasted on proposals that somebody thinks look really, really good, and they're not, and they wasted a lot of time on it. So be professional, be clean, be informative, have other people review it for you, and just periodically for style and see if there's something you should change. You may not want to let a marketing person at your proposals, because that may turn them into a work of art, which unfortunately may look great, but it may increase the cost of generating your proposals to a level that takes way too much of your time, and your time is extremely valuable. So, make it look good, but it's not a Fortune 500 annual report. Clean, complete, professional, and fast is going to close a lot more deals than late and, like looking like it's ready to be published in a magazine. And finally, closing the deal. So, once you get that proposal out there, the follow-up isn't just the follow-up from the initial request for a proposal. The follow-up isn't just getting that proposal out. The follow-up is also the follow-up after you sent the proposal. And this is probably one of the most important parts. There are so many tools now available today to help with the follow-up automatically, that it's mind-boggling. And so even every one of us experiences almost every day an email that we read that we think, wow, that was really nice of them to respond, that I guarantee you was an automated response. If they're done properly, they are extremely effective and extremely good at saving you time. So, follow-ups are really critical, and if you can use a system that has automated follow-ups, that much better, because that way you won't have to worry about it and you won't have to do it. So once we get our project out there, we close the deal. Just a couple of closing ideas. Once the deal's closed, you're not done. Once you get into the work phase of the project, you still have to continue selling, because you're still selling the customer on you with being courteous and efficient, honest and maintaining your integrity, doing what you said you'd do when you said you'd do it. Communicating is absolutely one of the most important things you can do. And again, there are a lot of vehicles now for automated communications that really streamline that process. So very, very easy to do, very important to do. And follow up after the job is done, completely finished. Again, there's lots of tools for that now that make it easy to do, and people do appreciate being followed up with after the fact. And when you do follow up with them, they'll give you feedback, and when they give you feedback, that's the opportunity to take advantage of that on the next deal, or to use that to get additional referrals with other customers. It's really, really a great opportunity. There's so many tools available today to streamline much of what we've talked about today. It's really a shame not to get involved. The technology has improved remarkably. The tools are cost effective, and they're approachable and usable by everyone. And in most of cases, they're usable anywhere. So there's just, you have to get started. You have to, streamline this process, make it efficient, make sure you're covering your costs appropriately and calculating your profit appropriately, and make sure you're following up. It's a guarantee of success. That's really what I had to say today. Again, top to bottom, this is one of the most important things for your business, is making sure you have your pricing out there right, and profitably. And so I hope everyone has enjoyed this. I hope everybody's gotten a little something out of it. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or I think Scott may be opening it up to dialogue as well. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate your being here.
Thank you very much.
Sure. My pleasure.
I do have a couple of questions that came over on chat.
Sure.
The most recent one, what are examples of the follow-up tools you mentioned as far as following up on your proposal?
Sure. So the best one is EstimateRocket. Shameless plug. But there are many CRM systems out there that have a variety of different types of automated follow-ups. With EstimateRocket, we have kind of fully incorporated that into our process. So, each step of the project has a series of automated follow-ups that automatically get canceled when you move to the next step of the project, so you're not cleaning up. I mean, there are some generic long-term follow-up tools out there like MailChimp and Constant Contact that are useful for those types of follow-ups. But in terms of the project level automated follow-ups, there are definitely a couple of other CRMs. It's definitely I'm struggling now for a name of a competitor here. It's really hard to come up with your competitors' names.
In general, though, it's a CRM type tool, then, right?
Yeah, there are definitely CRM type tools, and the buzzwords to look for are automated follow-up, or automated emails or things like that. And you just want to make sure that the tool you choose has an easy way to stop them as well as to start them. So you want it, ideally it's something that's, once the customer gets back to you, you can set a switch that says, okay, we're done with that phase, we're on to the next phase of automations.
Okay.
Now, the other thing you can do is, with a lot of email clients, you can also set up send later emails. I'm pretty sure Gmail has this, and more email clients are setting it. So you can do up your email and then just say send it in 3 days.
Right.
So at least you do it at the time you're queuing up. You've sent them a proposal. Now at that time you can queue it up to go out in a couple days from then.
Right. Another question is you mentioned on a slide about the ability to be ready and prepared to negotiate. Is that negotiate number built into your proposal on the front end? Do you have that like 5%, 10% of a willing to negotiate number in there? Is there a place for that, or is that just up to you?
I would never do that unless that's, if you're in a situation. I mean, my personal feeling on that is offering to be have a negotiable price should be a verbal thing, not necessarily a written thing.
Okay.
because it immediately says, "Oh, I'll give you a discount."
No,
And
no,
I
no, no.
think,
As far as your workup, your internal workup is concerned, do you have that? You have
oh,
that, right?
yeah. No, I mean, there's a pretty easy way to knock it down if you need to. But so let me make sure I understand the question. I mean, if you are in a situation where you find yourself having to do that a lot, then yes, you should build that negotiation buffer into your pricing.
Okay.
But that's sort of fooling that's sort of the flip side argument to that is this price already includes that. I mean,
Okay.
I guess it really depends upon your customer. If you got a customer who always wants a discount no matter what, then yeah, you got to build that price in up front.
Okay. That makes sense. And then the last one I have here is, is there a source or resource for determining what local labor rates are?
Yeah, actually, the like the Craftsman cost books and RS Means, they both offer regional pricing. So, it might not be your city, although I think they do have the big metropolitan areas covered. But they do offer regional, adjustments for regionality for the labor components of all their costing.
You said it was Craftsman, and what was the other one?
RS Means.
Okay.
I can get that back to you. RS Means I think goes under a couple different banners, so that they're like they're the publishing company, but I think they actually publish under a couple different, trade names. So
Sure.
I can find out what the trade. I've talked with the RS Means guys before, and I can't remember offhand what their publication names are, but I can find that out and shoot that out to you. You can get that back to whoever asked that one.
Okay. I thank everybody for joining us. If you want to send me your feedback on what you think of having this kind of event through Bragby, I greatly appreciate it. And you all have a good afternoon. Thank you.